This is Grief and Grit, from heartache to high fives with a dash of sass. The podcast that turns the tables on traditional grief talks with a fresh, sassy spin. Listen in for candid conversations about the messy, awkward, and downright hilarious aspects of dealing with loss. Because sometimes the best way to cope is with a little laughter and a lot of grit.
Hi, Simone.
Hi, Greer. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. At least a little bit dry today.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, we're here in Atlanta, Georgia, and yesterday it rained and rained and rained.
Never stopped.
And one point thought we were definitely going to wash away. But as I always say, lovely weather for the ducks, but certainly not for us humans.
I had to go to, well, I didn't have to, but I lovingly went to a Galentine's night last night with some girlfriends.
Oh, you're so
And
brave.
a friend, she just moved and she's in a new townhouse complex.
Right.
And I tried to make sure that I got there a little earlier, at least on time. That's early for me.
Yeah.
Because I still have my boot and I didn't want to have to
All
walk and like truck in
right.
the rain.
Yeah,
So I
and
wanted to make sure I
slip.
got a good parking spot because there's limited parking.
Yeah.
I made it, but then I parked like too close to her bushes. So I feel like it still took me forever to get in and out of the car, but it's fine. But it was a lovely evening.
Oh,
We all
good.
braved the rain. But yes,
Good. Well, no,
thankfully it's
I
like
didn't.
not anymore.
Yeah, today it's all nice and dry. So
Yes.
that's good. So as always, grab your tea, your coffee, your water, whatever it is, get comfortable. And yeah, so we have a very special guest today, a very, very dear friend of mine, David Pritchard, who is, him and I go back a long time.
Long 10 years? Has it been 10?
At least, yeah, at least 10 years.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
both been on different grief journeys, but definitely both been on the grief journey. And that's how we met.
Mhm.
We were doing the grief recovery method, which is something that you and I might, we can talk about, David.
Sure.
And just, bonded and became wonderful friends. And David has a story that none of us would ever think or want to go through ever. And he's willingly come on today to share his story and to give us some guidance and, for people who have been through similar things to help. And so, David, we are both so grateful to
Very.
you,
Yes. Very.
and we appreciate it
I
so
I
much.
got my tissues ready, so I'm okay.
Good
Yeah,
call.
yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and as we say on this platform, grief and grit, it's all about being vulnerable. It's all about letting your emotions out. And it's all about normalizing grief, that it's okay to cry. It's okay to be
Right.
angry. It's okay to feel shitty and have a crappy day. It's all in the journey of grief. So we'll have tissues crying with you. And, for all our listeners, whatever emotions come up for you, allow them to come up. Allow
Okay.
yourselves to feel.
Mhm.
That's what's important when we're going through any kind of grief, any kind of loss. And
Absolutely.
certainly doesn't matter how many years it's been
Nope.
and how many years are to come, it's there.
Hmm.
And that's what we want to do at Grief and Grit. We want to make you realize it's normal.
That's
Grief
right.
is normal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, David, if you want to take it away and share with our listeners a bit of your story and how you unfortunately got to walk this path.
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you for having me on. I'm just so excited about the two of y'all doing a podcast together. And Greer, I don't know you at all, but I know Sim well, and this is right up her alley. So I'm sure since y'all got together, it's up both of your alleys. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
It's interesting. I was thinking about it. I haven't So my son died um, 12 years ago. Sometimes it's hard to
Wow.
even remember. It'll be 13 years this summer.
Mm.
And yeah, for the first 2, 3, 5, 6 years, I told his story a lot
Mm.
because that was part of my healing journey. Um, and I think I've only told his story probably once in the past 4 or 5 years, which I'm just realizing that that's the case. So um, as
Yeah.
I'm talking, I realize how much emotion there is around that. So,
Oh.
but again, my name is David Pritchard. I've got 3 kids. My oldest is 35.
Wow. Oh my
I
gosh.
have a son who's 33. Nick would have turned 30 this year. He died when he was 17.
Oh.
So it was between his junior and senior year of high school. We got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. On the other line was someone from the police department. Are y'all home? Yeah. She goes, well, there's a policeman at your front door. Please open the door for him. It's like, that's never good news when that
Right.
happens. And so we knew that. And, you know, initially what I thought of was, well, Nick's done something stupid. He's in jail or something like that. You know, I didn't, that's all. So we went down. Police was a plainclothesman and two uniformed officers. And they told us what happened. And Nick had purchased a handgun the night before from somebody he played basketball with, kid on his basketball team. Now, the kid denies that, but we recovered Nick's phone. And everything on the last things leading up to his death were text messages between Nick and this guy.
Okay.
And so then Nick, he didn't take his life at home or anything like that, or even where a family member would find him. He went to a little lake that's in a neighborhood where we used to live, where he and his buddies used to go fishing. And so that's where he went. And when he got there, he texted several of his friends to see if anybody was still awake. When one of them responded, Nick texted him what he was going to do, where he was, what he was going to do, and for that guy to go tell me about it. And of course, the poor kid. I mean, it was a classmate of Nick's. He's 17 years old, and you've got what training do any of us have, particularly at that age, to help someone who's talking about taking their life?
Right.
And so he was frantic. He couldn't get Nick back on the phone, so he called the police and told them what was going on. And so the policeman found Nick. So it was devastating because Nick is smart, athletic, friendly, likable. He had great grades in school. You know, he had a huge posse. He liked all the kids. I mean, it wasn't he only hung out with jocks or smart people or kids, special needs kids. I mean, everybody loved him. So it was just to say that it was numbing was an understatement.
Right.
I honestly look back at particularly those first weeks, and just had no idea how either of us, either my ex or I, got through this, because it was just so, as a parent and as a dad, as a dad, it's my job to raise my kids and keep them safe. And so part of what I dealt with was the guilt of, well, I couldn't keep my son safe. And he was still just a kid. I mean, he was only 17 years old. So what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? And then, so there's dealing with that, and just dealing with the sadness of his loss, and the recognition that there, would never get to see him graduate from high school or college, or be an uncle to his nieces and nephews, or get married, or, honestly, my plan for Nick was that he was going to make a lot of money and take care of me in my old age.
And that's understandable. I have the same expectations. So, it's a parent's worst nightmare.
Yeah, it really was. And I was in some ways fortunate. because I had people at my church who had also experienced the death of a child by suicide, and others who had just experienced the death of a child, not by suicide, but by other means. And so the first support group I got into was called the Compassionate Friends.
Mhm.
And it's a peer-led support group for people who've experienced the death of a child
Mm.
from any reason, from premature birth to your child when they're 50 years old and they die. So
Oh.
I got involved with that, and that was just so helpful because, I mean, there's just such a few number of people that actually have any type of experience with
Mm.
the death of a child. Just like for
Right.
y'all, I mean, there's so few people that have experienced the death of a husband.
Mhm.
So this was helpful in that I got to meet a lot of other people who
Right.
were in various stages of grief, from ones whose child had died 10, 12 years later, and the only reason they kept coming to this group was to support other people, and people
Mm.
who were just as new and raw as I was.
Right.
And so that was a monthly support group, and that's an international organization. So if any of your listeners are looking for support, the Compassionate Friends, you can look them up online and find out.
Yeah. What a
And
great
then
resource.
the second thing, I started looking for other support groups because while that was good and that it helped me connect with parents, I also wanted to connect with people who had experienced the death of a loved one by suicide, because it was just so new to me.
Mm.
I didn't
Mhm.
know what to do, and so I found another group called Survivors of Suicide, which it's another peer-led support group for people who've experienced death by suicide of any loved one. And
Mm.
so I religiously went to both of those support groups for years. Got
Mm.
involved in leadership and Compassionate Friends, and so those were two of the kind of steps I took. I also went to therapy. I went to someone I
Mm.
could go talk to and just boo-hoo, and they would just listen and without judgment, and that's what I needed that. And then lo and behold, I met Simony, and we did a training together,
Yeah,
uh,
we did.
which was it was amazing training. It really was. And um, we also started a Facebook page. Got a Facebook page out there that I don't
Yeah,
think
and we
I'm
we
not
ran
doing
s-
anything with it. I don't know
we
about you.
yeah, we ran support groups as well with it.
We did.
Wow.
Because
We
I
did.
think just listening to you, David, it's so important to find your community.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing when you go through a tragedy is that feeling of aloneness and feeling of, I don't think there's anyone else in the world who's feeling what I am right now.
Right.
I don't think there's anyone in the world who's going through what I am now. And that makes it so difficult. But when you find that community of
Yeah.
people who are going through or have been through the same, I think it's so important, and it definitely helps in the healing process.
Right. And even just listening to you, David, this experience, it's just so isolating. It's no
Yeah.
one understands that loss, but then we also each grieve differently. I'm sure you and his mother grieves differently. And to your point, first you found a group for those who had lost a child really at any stage of life. And then you kind of delved a little more specific into those who had lost someone by suicide. And I, through my experience, I know those nuances were helpful, finding other young widows who had young children, because there are so many nuances in that specific type of loss. So it sounds like you found incredible communities in finding other peers who had been through something very similar to you.
Yeah. It was a huge help, Greer. It really was a huge help because I could go to those meetings and I could sit there and cry all meeting long,
Right.
and everybody be like, "Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
Sure."
Mm-hmm.
And I also was really fortunate in the spiritual community I attend. We have a men's group that meets monthly, and it was another place I could go, and we'd do a check-in, and my check-ins for a long time were really really sucky, and they didn't care.
Mhm.
They didn't care if I sat there and cried or whatever I wanted to do was fine. So all three of those things were just so helpful for me in feeling supported.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you were able to find those resources. It was good for you to seek them out. I know it can be overwhelming at times to begin that process and try to find resources like that.
Well, that's what I always found about you, David, is you always took the initiative to find some form of healing. You didn't, and I've always admired that. You never just sat back and, um, well, this is now my life, and maybe one day I'll feel better. Maybe one day I'll,
Right.
I'll be okay. You actually, you, you looked for the groups, you looked for the
Mhm.
therapy. So is that something that you would recommend to listeners to do?
I absolutely would. I think that for me, I was again fortunate that I had people close by me that were able to lead me to some of those places, but the others were just I didn't know anything about suicide.
Mm.
You know, anything more than what most normal people do. The idea of it just always frightened me,
Mhm.
and then it hit home. And the other thing is my nephew, Nick's cousin, died by suicide about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. He was probably 5 or 6 years older than Nick was, so it's hit our family hard twice,
Mm.
and
Wow.
that's rough. But when I started doing research, I just looked for suicide organizations, and American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is one of the biggest ones, and
Mm.
it's an international group that does research and probably put more money into research into suicide prevention and suicide care than any other organization. So I get involved with them. They do an annual walk at Piedmont Park, and the national organization does an overnight walk,
Yeah,
which is the idea is we walk overnight. It's an overnight walk. We walk overnight to bring the conversation of suicide out of the darkness. So it's
right.
called Out of the Darkness Walk.
So you walk
And I
through
did
the
one.
night into the light of the dawn.
Yep. So we started off at 7 o'clock at night and ended up at, I don't know, 5 o'clock the next morning. Walked through the city streets of Philadelphia.
Wow. Wow.
It was an amazing experience because my sister and her wife lived there, and so my son Brian went with me up there. So they didn't walk, but still in the middle of the night they came to one of the support areas to cheer people on at 3 o'clock in the morning. That was nice.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And that would be my next question. You had Nick had two older
Yep.
siblings. Um, how did this impact their lives, and how did it impact you as a parent? How does it impact your relationship with your surviving children?
Yeah. So Nick's older sister was getting ready to start her first year teaching. She's an elementary special ed teacher. And so she graduated from Georgia Southern and stayed in Statesboro and got a job there. So she was actually preparing her classroom. Well, actually, the week before or 2 weeks before, we had taken a trip. So Nick and Brian and Juanita, and I took a trip down to because my ex is also a special ed teacher, so she was going to help my daughter set up her room. So we went down there and then went down on vacation to see my brother. And so Rachel was getting ready to start this great new period in her life,
Mm.
and I, she was devastated by the news. I mean, it caught her off guard, like all of us did. It's like, hey, there's
Right.
no but I hear the words that you're saying, they just don't make any sense.
Right.
Right.
I just can't comprehend what you're saying. So that was a real hard time for her to begin a new career. And she and her brother were fairly close, not terribly close, but fairly close. They had a good relationship. Um, and so that was really, really hard on her. And then for my other son, he had he was one of those kids who he's smart, but didn't really want to work really hard at it. But I think he took that after me.
That's fair.
And
Can't blame him.
yeah, so it's like in high school, he had graduated high school with like a 2.95, so he didn't get the Hope Scholarship.
Right.
He went away to college and he had this B-ish, BC average kind of thing, and until Nick died. And Nick died, Brian was about halfway through his undergraduate work, and he tells a story that he realized that at that point, Nick never would have the opportunity to go to college, and so Brian needed to buckle down, and he ended up getting straight A's the rest of his undergraduate career. So he really buckled down. And I think as far as how we treated, it was really, really hard not to smother them because, of course, the biggest fear is that this is going to happen again. Yeah, or something is going, or something, whatever is going to happen. And so we had to just be real careful about not smothering them. They were both away. We lived in Atlanta. They were both actually in Statesboro. And Brian actually wanted to come back home and finish his undergraduate degree at home. And his mom convinced him that that's probably not the best thing for him. Although he wanted to be at home to take care of mom and dad, he really had his own life to live, and we would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but that was really, really hard. Just trying to make sure that they knew that we loved them, and also that we weren't going to smother them, not just going to be kind of running scared and interacting that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my daughter is married to another woman, and that woman and Nick actually were very close.
Mm-hmm.
So it was devastating for her.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was probably the first one in the family that really, first one in our family besides Rachel that she really connected with.
Right.
So that was really tough.
Yeah. And I know that, death by suicide has certainly become very much, a talking subject now. There seems to be so many more. Every day we hear of someone, just recently, friends of the girls, their baby brother died by suicide. And so it's definitely, do you think that, you're 12, almost 13 years away from it? Do you think that today it's more spoken about and it's more accepted and people are realizing that mental health is, I mean, it's so prevalent, especially in today's world with the pressure that these kids are under, social media and, just what's going on around them. Some may have identity crisis or, academic pressure. Do you think that it's being addressed enough? Do you think that it's definitely more accepted today and it's more spoken about than what you experienced then?
In my circles, it's certainly spoken about a lot more. I hear more discussion about mental health. What can we do to support people particularly at different stages in their life through mental health? Suicide, maybe before Nick died, I just, was like, didn't want to hear anything about it.
Right.
Now it's been one of those things where I'm not an expert, but I know a whole lot more about suicide than many other people. And often I'm the first one that, we've had a couple of suicides at our church. So, the minister will call me and say, hey, no pressure or anything, but would you be willing to talk to someone? And yeah, sure. So yeah, there is a lot more conversation. There's a lot more recognition that, well, on one aspect, with social media, we are so much closely more closely connected. Is that the right way to say it? Because of social media, because of the internet, because telephones, all that, and yet we are also so far apart. I mean, it's just so easy to think that we're connected on social media when we're not connected at all.
Right.
It's a how many people are really vulnerable on social media?
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the other part of my story is that I was really open about my journey. I posted a lot on social media. My daughter posted a lot on social media, and I had a number of people tell me how they appreciated that because they had not been impacted in the way I had been impacted, and it was really helpful for them to see. Not that they wanted me to be in pain, but that I could live in the pain and sit in the pain and still get on with my life. So yeah, that was a big aspect of it. And I occasionally post stuff. Usually it's around um, Suicide Awareness Week is in September, so it's usually sometime around there. I'll post some things, but I've gotten a lot less involved. I was real active with the AFSP on several different aspects, several different committees for a while, and then kind of let that fall off. And you know what I did find is after Nick died, I got so engrossed in dealing with grief. With my support groups, my individual sessions, the training that Sim and I did, and leading other people, and I went to volunteer at hospice just because I was. And hindsight, I can look back and go, that was probably a bit much. Probably wasn't helpful to get that deep into it because at times it felt hopeless because there was just so much grief. So I've found since then that there's a balance that I have to keep. Still dealing with it, but not. It's not as much a part of my life as it used to be.
Right. You move further away from it.
Yeah, I've moved further away from it. And I try to stay open to other people's needs. It impacts other people, and I tell a lot of people about the compassionate friends and survivors of suicide. Whenever I hear someone talk about a loss, so that they'll know. I was lucky that a friend from church took me to my first compassionate friends meeting. But over the course of years, there were people that would show up at meetings, and they had no idea. I mean, someone they kind of lucked on it or something, and so they had spent weeks, months, years without that support. So I really recognize how fortunate I was to have that. I guess also
support.
not only was I fortunate, but I was also willing, and I was also willing to learn what grief is and how to deal with grief, and I know that that is hard. It was hard for me, and I know, particularly being a male in our society, we're not supported in crying and being vulnerable. You hear people wanting we want alpha males. Like, well, okay, have at it. Really going well for our world, isn't it?
Yeah, right. But that's such a good point. And I think that you learned, and I think that this is something that's so important, is that you do have to sit with the grief. You have to sit in it because the other way is so you felt that you were so far in it, like you were immersed in it. It became your whole world. And then there are people who run from it and don't want to face it and don't want to sit with it. And eventually it all catches up with you. It may be 10 years down the line, but I think that's such an important point that you looked for the help, you sat with it, and you healed from it. You've so much, as you say, today it's the first day in many years that you're actually telling the story.
Right.
Yeah.
And yes, it's still bringing up grief for you, but you know what to do with that grief.
Hmm.
You know after you finished here that you're going to sit with it for a while,
Right.
Hmm.
and then it's going to be okay.
So, David, one question I have, knowing that, uh, the stereotypes of, so many males do not, show their emotions and have that vulnerability. What is it that made you maybe be more open and sit with your grief? And I just, was it a part of your personality? Is it something, did you experience a loss when you were younger? There are so many people, no matter gender, situation. Some of us are able to be open about our grief and talk about it, and some of us aren't. And that's okay. We all have to do what is best for us. But just knowing all of the resources that you sought out and found, and not only became part of, but even held leadership positions and have mentored other grievers or been a support for other grievers. What is that? What do you think sparked that?
Well, I think that's just my personality as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a helping kind of person.
Mm.
Um, that's why my college, I had an undergraduate degree in psychology, and
Okay.
realized I don't want to sit and listen to people talk about their problems all day long. So I went a
Fair.
different direction, and actually then ended up as a massage therapist for 17 years.
Oh, wow.
And so and that opened me up a lot because up to that point I wasn't really open and being touched or having people in my space, and so that really, you go through training, you go through work, doing that much work with people, you become open. So that was part of it as well, is that I just had that personality. And then when I could no longer physically do the amount of massage I needed to, I went back and got a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. So that's kind of always been things that I've wanted to do, is to help people. So I think
Yeah.
that's just, I've never been the alpha male, and I've been okay with that for a long time. It's like, it's okay. I'm going to be the comforting person,
Yeah.
and
I
still
love that.
strong, but just
Mhm.
because I'm comforting, it doesn't mean I'm not strong.
Right. Wow. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
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 Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, what are some things that we spoke about the pressures of kids today and the pressures that teenagers are under. Is there anything that you could say as a parent who's been through this that other parents should be aware of, things that you should look for, signs that it may be, not to be ignored, um, things that you've maybe thought about in the years moving on that perhaps were maybe red flags, in hindsight, or not. But what would you say for parents today, because it's so prevalent today and because of the pressures, what are some things that parents can look out for?
Hmm.
Yeah, of course, that's one of the things that people always ask about. Well, what were their signs before they died? Well,
Right.
Mm,
frankly, fuck you.
Hmm.
Um,
mm,
it's what I always felt, because
Hmm.
yeah,
that felt like it was an attack on me. Like, oh, you missed
Right.
something. It was your problem. Well,
Right.
that didn't
right.
feel good. Because the thing is, you can look. I mean, I can look back on Nick's life and go, ah, that was a sign. Was that a sign? Was that a sign? For a 17-year-old boy, 17-year-old boys just go through shit. They're
Right.
Yeah,
just, it's life. It's
Exactly.
You're dealing with all those hormones, and you're dealing with you know
correct.
relationships, and with Nick, he was dealing with disappointment from not making a basketball team he wanted to be on, and just he was confused.
Hmm.
Certainly, I never would have looked at any of those things and said, "Oh yeah, I better be careful. He
Yeah,
might take his life." That
Right.
just never, never, never crossed my mind.
Right.
But I think that if I could suggest anything to people, is just make sure you're talking to your
yeah,
child.
Hmm.
Yeah.
whether he's, I mean, see so many times where kids are not even teenagers yet or taking their life. And so
Right.
just talk, make sure they're understanding. The other thing I think too is that I don't know if this has to do with suicide or what, but mental health wise, the
Mm.
food that we put into our bodies is crap.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at all the different ingredients, and we just don't have any idea the long-term effect on some of these ingredients.
Right.
So I would really encourage people to, hey, when you're doing your grocery shopping, where they say shop on the outer ring, not
Yes.
inside where you get all the packaged boxes and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
would that have made any difference? I don't know. Uh, but I certainly think that that's something that people could look at. We Nick had a wide variety of friends. And we had them that were at our house fairly regularly. So,
Mm-hmm.
none of us really uh, saw something that would say, "Oh no." I would
Right.
say if you have a child that is having really bad grades, tough time at school, having tough time with friends, um, doesn't want to talk, is that's something that I would really want to step into and find help, whether it's
Yeah.
Right.
counseling or whatever it is, but find some way to help help that child
Right.
Yeah. And
feel more
I think you're
comfortable in
right.
your
Open communication is key.
Right. Right. And it's interesting because my kids were 3 and 4 when
body.
my husband passed.
Okay.
And I have always been an advocate for therapy and mental health support. And especially in the world today, there are too many um, stimuli around us and things that can trigger just different emotions. And our brains aren't wired for that, just from an evolutionary standpoint. So I, my kids will always have a therapist just because we do have grief from such
Right.
a young age for them. And I always tell friends, I said, there have been times where I've seen my therapist twice in a year, and there have been times where I've had to see my therapist more than once a week. It just
Mhm.
depends on what life brings at that time.
Hmm.
And, teenagers, they take the world on themselves and forget
Mhm.
that they're kids.
Yeah.
They're
Yep. They're
kids.
kids. They're
They
The
are.
kids.
world forgets their
And
kids.
we do.
We
We
have such
completely forget.
expectations of them.
Exactly. And, just we even as adults, we have to be reminded, like, we're not meant to do this alone. We
Right.
need other people surrounding us when we fall, or when the floor is ripped out from underneath us. And it it's just, I wish that it was easier for people to ask for help, because it's so hard asking for help and
Hmm.
recognizing that maybe we do need help. And, I it's
Yeah.
something that we have to educate, people on from such a young age, but that's a cultural thing that doesn't really exist in our society. It's talked about more. It's
Mhm.
okay to ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It used to be a sign of weakness, and I'm glad we flipped the narrative. But are people actually living that narrative that we have flipped? So, it's such a tragedy, because it's impacting those who are so vulnerable, and we can't stop it. We can't stop it unless society.
Flips the narrative. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The world just keeps moving faster and faster and
Hmm.
it
faster. The
does.
amount of knowledge that's gained, it goes faster and faster. And when I was a kid growing up, we got to play outside a lot, and
Hmm.
we'd come home maybe for lunch and for dinner. We were gone a lot, and
Hmm.
my parents didn't worry about us. They knew we were safe,
Yeah.
and gosh, these days you just can't do that.
No,
Right.
no.
You
Right.
can't, and
And
for
nor do kids know how to play anymore.
Right.
right,
It's all about screens. I mean, little babies are addicted to their mother's
It's
iPhones,
yeah, it's
and I think that that's the breakdown in the communication part of society.
there's a book that a lot of my peers have been reading. It's called Anxious Generation, and it's
mm,
about the teens and the those in their young 20s. And there is a lot of it's by a researcher, and it talks about the differences in a screen-based childhood versus a play-based childhood. It's
oh,
exactly what you're talking about, David. And I happened to listen to this a few months ago, and my son has a new doctor, and the doctor gave us some very strict orders of early bedtime. He needs to be playing outside basically from the time that he comes home until it's time to eat dinner. And if it's raining, you get him an umbrella and some rain boots and push him out the door. And I said you're lucky that I've read or listened to this book, because this reduction in screen time and all these things, like this is really hard, especially for a solo parent. I
mm,
need the TV to be a babysitter sometimes, but listening to him after reading this book, it was the same thing. And you are so right, David. Everything you're saying, we kids have to learn to play, to your point, Simony, and spend time outside and
Communicate.
test their own
Yeah.
limitations, and if they fail, they're not failing in front of their parents. They're failing and on their own, and then they can try again
mhm.
and try again. And there's not this, constant, not, I don't want to say pressure, but constant feedback that, the parental eyes are watching and judging. And, like obviously we all want them to succeed the first time they do it, but that's not life.
Sure.
Who
That's
does
not
that?
life. No.
No,
Right.
no.
Right.
So
Yeah, and
yeah,
then we have people like me that grow up, and it's like at this point, it's like I don't want to try very many things new because I only want to do them if I can do them
Right.
right.
Right. Exactly. I mean, yeah, it
right.
takes a lot of energy to have to keep trying to succeed. Like, what just comes naturally that we can just, make happen.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
get that.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, David, I would you share about Nick? And I know that he had a lot of friends and he was a good student, but what was he like when he was younger, and what kind of little brother was he? And can you share more about Nick with us?
Yeah, sure, sure. So he was an active child. He just liked to be going all the time. Athletically, from time he hit t-ball until his life, he was active in some sport or another, and he was a very happy boy. He liked to laugh. People liked to be around him
Mhm.
because he was generally in a good mood. Um, he was sometimes at the time I was working from home, and I always enjoyed it when he got home from school because he'd come up into my office and we'd just sit and talk for 30 minutes or so about
Mhm.
school, about life, etc. Like that was really some uh, really meaningful times for me looking back on that. But
Mhm.
he was thoughtful. He would, there were times. I'll give you a for instance. So the night that he died, he and I had been sitting on the couch watching TV, and he was kind of on his phone, texting back and forth. I didn't think that much about it. That's what he usually did. And then he got up about 11 o'clock and said, "Hey, I'll be back in a minute." He went out and got in his car. And my thought was, well, he went over to a friend's house to get a video game or to pick up something to take to a friend or something like that, just because that's what he did. He would
Mhm.
take things to friends like that. But that's just kind of the way he was. He was generous. He was hardworking. He started working pretty early. So, he worked at Chick-fil-A. He and my daughter both had times at Chick-fil-A, worked at Chick-fil-A for the same owner, as a matter of fact.
Uh,
But he was a kid that was hard not to like. He
mm,
wasn't he didn't bully people. He didn't berate anybody. He really
mm.
tried to support people. Um, yeah, so that's Nick.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, thank you
Well,
for introducing me to Nick. Yeah.
and David, thank you
Yes.
for being with us today and for
Yes.
being vulnerable. And, I know parts of it hasn't been easy. I'm bringing that all
Mm-mm.
up again. So we really appreciate it. And I know that our listeners appreciate it. And, anytime you want to come on and share and,
Yeah.
you're welcome back anytime.
Very,
Oh,
yes,
thank you.
truly.
Thank you. I
Truly.
appreciate that.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
David.
We're
Yeah. Well,
very
this has been, it's
grateful.
been, it's like, I always love to talk about my son. So it's been nice having this opportunity to tell his story again, tell my story, our story again.
Mm-hmm.
And my certainly my sincerest hope is that there'll someone out there that will gain some type of a um, sense of support or some knowledge
Mm-hmm.
on how they can get more support through this, because there's a lot of support out there.
Right.
Yeah.
So one final question before we end. What would you say to those who are trying to support a loved one who has lost a child, whether by suicide or any other way? How can people support the
The griever.
parents?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can tell you a few. What immediately comes to mind is a few things not to say, and
Great.
y'all probably got this too. Oh, well, God needed him more than you did.
Right.
Mm.
Oh, he's in a
Yeah.
better place.
Oh
Right.
no, no,
No.
no, 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 no.
Oh, nope, forget about it. Right. And I think that the thing that anyone can do is if they want to be support is just to be there,
Mm,
just to take the person out to lunch, take them out to breakfast, still have coffee with them, give them a call on the phone,
Mhm,
see what you can do to be company with them,
mhm,
and just allow whatever type of emotion they need to have, let them have that.
mhm.
Listen to their story. I mean, you might have to listen to their story over and over and over again, because when we're in grief, we want to tell that story because it's
right.
important to us, and we want to remember.
Mhm.
For us, it's remembering a child. That's the biggest fear. It's like, well, gosh, nobody's going to remember who Nick was.
Mm.
And
Right.
so, helping to remember them, yeah, whether it's doing activities that will help them do that, or I think it's a lot of times it's just showing up. Honestly, it's
Hmm.
Yeah.
just simply showing up and
Right.
being there with someone. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to just be there, just
Mhm.
hang out. I think that's
Right.
the biggest thing, and ask if there's anything that you can do. Usually, like you said earlier, Grit, it's so hard for us to ask for help, and
Yeah.
that is so true. I experienced that for myself also, and so sometimes it's don't wait for someone to ask for something.
Hmm.
Um, you know, our friends would ask us, "What do we want to do?" And finally, I told my at one place, "I want someone to come clean our bathrooms for us,"
Right.
and they did.
Right.
I want someone to come mow my lawn, and they did.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
you do those things without asking, or if you're going to see someone, make sure you just take some extra toilet paper or some
Yeah.
Hmm.
Kleenex or some hand soap or some
Right.
cookies, or take something that's going to help them feel
Mhm.
like you really thought about them.
Right. Something I've read is to ask the parent to share stories about their child,
Mhm.
also to say their name a lot.
Yes,
They
thank you.
want to
Yes,
hear their child's name. And then even maybe a call or a text if you're
yeah,
thinking about that person, or especially maybe on you're on the child's birthday or maybe the anniversary of when they died,
Mhm.
just to recognize that that person lived and that the parent still loves and grieves for that child.
Those are all such great points, Greer, because you're right. We do. We want to hear our child's name because, I hear my daughter's name and my other son's name a lot, but
Right.
I'm not interacting with Nick. We're not so yeah, we really miss out on that, and love telling stories about him or having memories, and that's those are all really really helpful things. And you're right. The 2 days that are most difficult for me are his birthday
Mm.
and what we call his angel day.
Mm.
I love that
And so
name.
those come up, and it sometimes even catches me off guard because I think, oh, by
Mm.
this time I should be so far ahead, and blah 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 blah, and I realize grief is grief, emotion's
Grief is
emotion.
grief.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
okay to feel sad about it.
of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Not going to wallow in it, sit it forever, but usually for a day or so, it's like this doesn't feel good.
It's
Right.
part of our DNA. It really
Yeah.
Literally.
is.
Yeah.
Literally part
Yeah.
of our
It
DNA.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm so grateful that I got to meet you. I hate that this is what brought us together, but thank you for sharing your story and for being such a wonderful dad and continuing to carry Nick's legacy and to share beautiful stories about Nick. I'm very grateful.
Well, you're quite welcome, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
David. We'll speak
Hmm.
to you
Okay.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love what you heard, please follow Grief and Grit and share our podcast with your friends and family.